Welcome back to the Transformers and the creation of a billion-dollar brand. In this episode, we're going to return to Hasbro directly and the generation of the revenue that was made in terms of the Hasbro company and Steven Hasenfeld. It must be understood that the toy line was the bread and butter, the glue that held together everything else. And because of the success of that cartoon series, the toy line generated a lot of revenue. And in 1985, in the fiscal years of 1985 through 88, the toy line and the merchandising and everything that went with it saw an increase of revenue of 268 million to 433 million. And these fiscal years made Hasbro the largest. This is according to the financial publication, the largest toy store, largest toy maker next to Mattel. Mattel would be the only real rival of Hasbro in this 80s period. And Steven Hasenfeld tried to merge his toy store with his rivals, tried to get that. One of the mergers that he was able to accomplish was the merger with Milton Bradley, which happened in 1986. And this was really the crescendo of Steven Hasenfeld's career as the CEO of Hasbro. You know, on Tai Lopez's The Pay System, he was probably an A being for action, S, E, and P. But he was a man of action, no question about it. And that merger was for 360 million. But this could not have happened without what the toy line and the merchandising and marketing of the Transformers brand did between these years. Because in 1985, that was when the real fiscal impact of the Transformers marketability really appeared on their annual report and the balance sheet. And after that, he retired, and his brother Alan, let me see here, Hasenfeld, started to play a more and more dominant feature. Steven Hasenfeld, because of his work and because of the pressures of the job, had to start relinquishing the toll that it was all taking on his health. Had to start relinquishing his position to Alan Hassenfeld. And as a consequence of that, you had inroads that were made by other people, because it was in the 85 block that you had things like the Thundercats start to, and that was the LJN toy line. Start to take over. It was, according to the Nielsen ratings, the number one television series starting, I think, in late 85 and remained there for a time. So it pushed the Transformers down. The movie, which I'm going to talk about, as I said in the last episode, independently of this series, but did not do as well. But I'll tell you, the person that was looking at these inroads that children's afternoon cartoons were doing to the market was none other than Michael Eisner. And Michael Eisner seeing how Hasbro, Mattel, and others were making incursions in on the children's market, which was supposed to be primarily a Disney monopoly, according to the Disney brands and the Disney companies' mindset. He saw this impact, and he said, well, we've got to create something. And what he did was create the Disney Afternoon, to take a big hunk out of, but that took years. The Transformers remained until after the failure of the movie to really put Disney, because Disney was one of the companies that Hasbro saw as a direct rival. And so the rivalry of Disney and Hasbro really ended, or shall I say, Disney still won out in terms of being able to draw those children who were part of the audience and the consumer audience to the movies. Well, with the toy line Hasbro, at least in terms of Transformers the movie, did not make the kind of impact in terms of the box office. But the movie has become a cult classic, as they say. Even though, as Adam Ant used to say, to be a cult hero is just another way of being a loser. But nevertheless, in terms of the staying power of a movie or even a brand, Hasbro did win out in the end in terms of that, and was successful. And the Hasbro merchandising of the Transformers, in spite of the ending of the original animated series, which just became lousy. You had many of the characters that were voiced in the movie, voiced by different people in the aftermath of the movie, and many of the characters, like Scatman Carruthers, voice actors, died. And even after the ending or the cancellation of the cartoon series, you still had the merchandising of the toy line, which continued and went on. And it allowed eventually Hasbro to buy Tonka, which was its rival with the GoBot series, which was a knockoff. But you see, you had the rivalry. One of the reasons why the animated series was canceled is because you had other things. Ruby Spears came up with a different version of the trend stacking that I was talking about before in terms of AI technology machinery called the Centurions. That took parts of the market out of that. LJN, like I said, had the Thundercats, but it also had something else. It had the toy line of the Bionic Six, which merged machine and man, just like the Centurions for Ruby Spears. Centurions merged the concept of machine and man. But nevertheless, as I was saying, Alan, under the leadership of CEO Alan Hassenfeld, in 1991, Hasbro was able to take over and merge with Tonka. Tonka became the affiliate of Hasbro. And so it won that battle. And to wrap up, but it was the continuance and the staying power, and as I said in the last episode, of the toy line that continued to see a revenue stream come in terms of Hasbro and made it, even in the face of Stephen Hassenfeld's death. Stephen Hassenfeld tragically died at 47 in 1989. So he wasn't able to see how the Transformers series, in terms of the toy line series, would continue. And this relationship with Takara would continue. It would venture forth throughout the other marketplaces internationally. But nevertheless, the branding remained. And that is the key. The branding of a toy line and a merchandise is what makes it timeless. And I cannot emphasize that enough. And further inquiry, this is just my treatment into that. Because this should be taught in the business schools. You have to have creativity. And had Hasbro been able, Steven wore himself out. The only thing that Hasbro needed was somebody to turn it into what Disney is. And the fact that you don't have any kind of theme park where you can go and see a life replica of Autobot City or something like that. That is what was missing. You did not have somebody at the helm. Stephen Hassenfeld was good, but he was not the kind of visionary that Walt Disney was. And indeed, Michael Eisner would see the appropriation of Marvel Productions, which I think in the early 2000s would become part of the Disney brand. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this exploration of the Transformers toy line and merchandise and branding and its metamorphosis into a billion-dollar brand, which it is today. It is a billion-dollar brand because of the continued emphasis on the action figures. And it is that continuance, the loyalty that the generations that grew up with that toy line have to the toy line, and now their children, and I'm sure in some cases even grandchildren, have to that toy line, has made it a billion-dollar brand that I am sure will be here to stay for another 25 years. I am Ethan Malvo, and thank you for listening and taking the time to explore with me the creation and the invention of a billion-dollar brand. Take care.